Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." New International Version, Genesis 1, verse 26. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them shall fall on the ground without your Father, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. American Standard Version, Matthew 10, verses 29 through 31. This episode has several trigger and content warnings for child sexual abuse, for animal neglect, harm, and death, for violence, and for gun violence. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. He gave them dominion over the animals. How many times has anyone who has grown up in church heard this phrase or this lesson, this sermon? We as people have dominion over the animals. This idea that we're in charge of them. And I've heard it talked about in so many different ways because everyone has a different perspective. It's like if someone put a diamond suspended in the air in the middle of a group of people, and each person saw a different facet and thought it was the whole and interpreted it a different way, much like they do with God in general. And it's really interesting when you talk about dominion over the animals and this idea of conquering versus nurturing. It's the idea of patriarchy versus matriarchy. And I've talked before about the argument I had with my husband about the difference between patriarchy and matriarchy, and his argument at the time that matriarchy was no better. And my argument, matriarchy is an egalitarian culture, that matriarchy ensures that everyone has their needs met, that matriarchy is a nurturing culture, and patriarchy is a conquering culture. Patriarchy is supported by capitalism because patriarchy says somebody has to be in charge, somebody has to be on top. And there's no way for society to exist and to function unless there's somebody on top, in charge. And capitalism supports that by reducing everyone to slaves, to profit. I want to talk about some of my pets that I've had, and this is going to be very triggering for a lot of people, and it's very triggering for me to talk about. I had 3 black dogs before I left my parents' house, and that number is not insignificant, and it is not lost on me as a devotee of Hecate. My first black dog was named Max. On Christmas Eve, 2 little black puppies showed up at the end of our road. We lived in a very rural area where people would often just drop off unwanted pets that they didn't want to deal with, they didn't want to raise, they didn't want to take responsibility for, and didn't want to take to any kind of shelter or pound or anything where they might be cared for. They were just dropped off, quote, in the country. And Max showed up with his brother, who looked like a chow. Max looked like a lab. His brother looked like a chow. They were both black dogs. They were both puppies, very young puppies. They were both very happy dogs. My sister and I had gone down because our mailbox and our paper box was about a quarter mile from our house. So we would walk that every day to go check the mail or get the paper. We walked down, and there were these two little dogs, and they followed us home. And our dad agreed that we could keep them. And I picked the one that looked sort of like a lab, and I named him Max. And he was the first dog that was mine. Wasn't the family dog, he was my dog. And as Max got older, and my dad had always been the person to work with the dogs. He never taught us how to work with dogs or how to train them. He just did it himself and somehow assumed we knew how to do it, even though we were both very young teenagers, and did not work with these dogs at all. We were raising chickens at the time, and these dogs thought it would be really fun to chase the chickens and kill them. And like many country people, my dad had the idea that if they got the taste of blood, they were untrainable at that point. And he said we had to get rid of them. And so he told us to stay inside, and he went outside with his gun. And my sister and I were obviously very upset. We were crying, and my mom was giving us the gaslighting that he had trained her to give about how this was necessary. And my dad was getting a little bit older at this point. He wasn't old, but he was middle-aged, and his eyesight was worse. He never had good eyesight in the first place. And we took aim to kill my little Max. He did not hit where he wanted to hit. And he wounded Max instead of killing him. And so Max did what he knew to do, which was to run to the person who he knew was safe. And he ran up to our back door, which was mostly glass, to where he knew I was, yelping and spurting blood and crying and looking to me to save him. And I did instinctually what anyone would do when their dog ran to them for protection, and I opened the door. And my mother pulled me back and slammed the door shut and told me I couldn't go out. And I watched my father chase my dog down and shoot him again until he was dead. And when my father finally came back in, I was hysterical, as any young teenage girl would be, having seen that. And quite frankly, how I'd probably be now, as a middle-aged woman, having seen that. And my father was angry with me because I shouldn't have wanted him to live, because he killed some chickens, because he didn't understand where his boundaries were. A little less than 10 years went by, and some friends of ours had found some puppies that were dropped off at their little corner of the country. And they had decided to keep one, but didn't want to keep both. And we were looking for a dog at the time. And so she became my dog. And I named her Barbie, just with an I, because my name ends in an I. And so she could be like me. She was some kind of pit bull cross. She had one ear that flopped down and one ear that stood straight up. She is one of the best dogs that I've ever had. She was loyal. She was obedient. She was smart. And she loved me. Had her about 8 months. And I got very, very sick. I'm so sick that I couldn't get out of bed for several weeks. And my dad came in and told me that she was dead, and he was sorry, and he left. My sister came in after and told me that the day before she had been acting funny and that she had thought that maybe she got bit by a snake, but no one did anything for her. And then the next day they came out and she was dead. And then I got Liberty. Liberty I got a few weeks after I had been sexually assaulted. She was a puppy. One of 8 puppies. Their mother showed up at someone's house after a tornado had went through the area, and they could not find the owner. And then she proceeded to have 8 puppies in these people's yard. Unable to find the owner, they gave away the puppies, and Liberty was one of those. And she is the cutest puppy I have ever seen in my entire life. She was so full of personality and just so full of sweetness. And she walked me through every crossroads that I went through at that time. She is the best dog that I've ever had. And when I moved out of my parents' house, I left her there because I moved into an apartment that didn't allow pets. It was the only one I could afford at the time, and my mom said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of her. You can get her whenever you have a spot that's your own because she is your dog." And I said, okay. And I tried to give her money for food. I tried to buy food for her, and my mom said, no, don't worry about it. We'll take care of her because she's doing stuff for us, She's keeping the deer and the rabbits out of the garden because they kept her outside, and she was very protective. She was a watchdog. She was a guard dog, for sure. And then my mom sent me a picture of her in 2019 when I had a friend who I've mentioned on this podcast before who became very abusive later. And this friend fostered dogs. And the picture my mom sent me, my dog looked like the Michelin blimp. She was so overweight, she was rotund. And when I took her to the vet, she was 40 pounds overweight, which is a lot for anyone, but it's a lot for a dog. And I said I was taking her back, and that caused a lot of drama, and that's a story for another day. That was probably the biggest rift with my parents before I cut my dad off, was me taking my dog back. Because when I told my mom I wanted to take her back, she tried to argue with me about it. And I just called her out and I said, then just say that you lied to me, because you told me that she was my dog and I could get her back whenever I was ready. And now you're telling me that I shouldn't take her back. So either admit that you lied to me or let me get my dog. And we haven't had the same relationship since. They had neglected her so badly. They just gave her heaping scoops of the worst kind of dog food that they could give her. And rather than giving her attention, they gave her the little, Milk Bone. It wasn't Milk Bone brand, it was Costco brand, but the Milk Bone kind of treats. Every time she'd come to the door, wanting to be around them, wanting attention, wanting what I know now was a job because she was part Border Collie, they just gave her food, and the worst quality of food possible. And so she got really, really fat to the point that it strained her organs and her joints. And so I rescued her, and for all of the bad things that I can say about my ex-best friend and the trauma that she put me through and the abuse that she put me through, she did help me get my dog back, and she helped her get healthy. And I will always be grateful to her for that, because Liberty had been neglected for a really long time. And I look at all 3 of these beautiful dogs, and I am grateful to Hecate for bringing them into my life and for what they did to walk me through the crossroads that I was at the time. And I am bringing this up for a reason. We talked about these verses about animals for a reason. I have one more really traumatic story to share, and this one is particularly violent. So please scroll ahead to the time mark that is 18 minutes and 10 seconds. So I was about 13 or 14 years old when this happened, and I had a bunch of cats. I always had a bunch of cats because my parents didn't believe in spaying and neutering. Our cats were all just like feral barn cats. They were all outside. Most of them didn't live past a year, 2 years max. And so these cats were always getting pregnant from like their sons or their brothers or whatever. And anyway, we had a bunch of cats, and there was this one cat, Fluffy. I did not name it Fluffy. I had very creative names for my cats. My dad would rename the cats after I had spent hours outside learning their personalities and figuring out what to name them. And this was one of them. Obviously, it was a long-haired fluffy cat. He named it Fluffy. It was like, it had a really interesting color pattern. It was kind of a tabby. It had the like stripy kind of pattern, but it was also kind of a calico. So it was like calico patterning within the tabby stripes, and it was Fluffy. His name was Fluffy. It was a really sweet cat. It was kind of feisty, but it was really sweet. It was one of my favorite cats that we had at the time. And I was outside. I was doing my morning feeding of all the animals, the chickens, the cats, the dogs, and everything. I hadn't gotten to the cats yet. For some reason, my dad was up earlier that day, and he decided he was going to feed the cats. And my dad always tried to pet the cats, and they didn't like him, and they would run away. This was like a recurrent theme. Like, he would try to be friends with the cats, and the cats were like, no thank you. He went to try to pet this cat, and the cat, being the feisty little thing that she was, bit him because it didn't want him putting his hands on her. And I heard him scream, ow, and I turned and I looked, and he picked up a crowbar and knocked my little Fluffy off the top of the cat house. It was a flat-topped cat house, had a sloping roof, and we would feed them on top of there. He knocked her off, and he beat her to death with the crowbar in front of me. And I started crying. Just the violence of it, and I just watched my cat die. And I was walking over to feed the cats when he did that, and I didn't have to, obviously, because he had already fed them. And then that happened, and he saw me and that I was crying, and he said, "What?" And all I could find the words to say was, "Why did you kill my kitty?" And he yelled at me, "She bit me. Do you want a cat that bites?" And between that happening and him coming in after botching his euthanization, I'll be kind in my phrasing, of my dog Max, and being angry that I was crying, I realized that my dad really didn't care about animals or about how anyone felt about them. So why am I talking about animals and animal trauma and violence? What does that have to do with anything? It is the idea of conquering versus nurturing within the context of dominion. Because within the context of patriarchy and within the context of evangelical religion, dominion means conquering. It means ruling with an iron fist. It means the physical ability to stop someone from doing whatever it is that you don't want them to do, and their acknowledgement of the fact that they are physically inferior to you. And so when you see these verses about having dominion over the animals, or even the verse about his eye being on the sparrow, it is read and taught with the context that dominion means total control. And just as a little side note, I think this is why so many from the evangelical community become very into BDSM, either when leaving the evangelical community or in secret while they're still a part of it. The BDSM community definitely has the power dynamics in play of someone who's dominant and someone who's submissive. But the thing that's unique about it that you don't see within the evangelical church or within patriarchy in general is consent. And with all of these new Epstein files being released, consent has been kind of at the forefront of my brain. And I had a birthday a few weeks ago, and a friend of mine sent me a book. The title of this book is How to Piss Off Men. The subtitle of this book is 109 Things to Say to Shatter the Male Ego. This book is written by Kyle Prue, who is a cis white male. And this book is not at all what you think it is by the title. It's not at all what you think it is when you find out that it's written by a cis white male. But I want to read this paragraph from the end of the book in the section called Why to Piss Off Men. There is no page number on this page. Sorry. It's the last page right before the acknowledgments. The patriarchy puts women in a box. And then it puts men in their own box, on top of that one. And on some level, men think that qualifies as a win. But at the end of the day, everyone's still trapped in a box. We men are all trapped in there together with our anger, our egos, and maybe a goose or two. You'll have to read the book to understand the goose reference. And I highly recommend the book. It's very entertaining. It's short. And it packs a good punch and it makes a good point. The thing about patriarchy is that patriarchy can't survive without capitalism and vice versa. And they both exist in harmony with each other to achieve the singular goal that nothing is worth anything except profit. Patriarchy and capitalism are the Leviathan. They are Beelzebub. They are Mammon. They are the evil that is spoken about by Jesus and his disciples. And speaking of Jesus, there are 3 passages in the Bible, one in Matthew, one in Mark, and one in Luke. I'm going to read the one in Matthew. Matthew 18:6, Mark 9:42, and Luke 17:2 all mirror the same passage. I'm going to read from Matthew, and I'm going to start in verse 1. In that hour came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called to him a little child, and set him in the midst of them, and said, Verily I say unto you, except ye turn and become as little children, ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whoso shall cause one of these little ones that believe on me to stumble, it is profitable for him that a great millstone should be hanged about his neck, and that he should be sunk into the depth of the sea. And I think about that verse a lot as I'm reading through the Epstein files that are being released. That Jesus said, it's better for you to be drowned than for you to cause harm to children. A few days ago, I read a comment in a post that was about some of the files. And this person said, how is this our country? How is this our government? They were shocked and horrified at the state of what everything is. And I couldn't help but laugh at that. Because regular people have been getting away with raping children for a really long time. And regular people are the ones who don't have the finances or the resources to get away with that shit. So, of course, the most rich and the most powerful are getting away with it, and getting away with it in more egregious ways than the regular people are doing it. Look at the Catholic Church. Look at the Southern Baptist Church. Talk to anyone who has deconstructed and left the evangelical church. Talk to anyone who was raised by parents in the Quiverful movement and who have gotten away from that mentality. I know more women who were sexually abused as children than women who were not. And so we get into this sort of like moral problem, this kind of ethical conundrum of trying to decide what to do in a society like this. And we've been faced with this over and over again, and we just didn't realize it. Because the thing about these new releases from the Epstein files is the fact that women have been telling you this for years now. For like over a decade now. Women have been telling you what happened and what is being released from those files, but you didn't believe them. And we have this judicial tyranny where women report rape or sexual abuse or domestic abuse, and it never goes to trial because it can't go to trial if it never goes in front of a grand jury, and it can't go in front of a grand jury if the district attorney doesn't decide to bring it in front of a grand jury, and that can't happen if the investigator doesn't bring it to the district attorney for them to see, here's all this evidence, and they would have had to investigate it first. And that doesn't happen because women say it was someone who I met at a party, or it was my husband, or it was my boyfriend, or it was my father, or my stepfather, or my uncle, my grandfather, my best guy friend. And we somehow just don't believe it's possible that that could have happened. Someone who I love very much, have a lot of respect for, had more respect for him before he said this, said in front of me about someone else. This person has a band, and a former band member had been not just accused of rape, but taken to trial for it, indicted, and found guilty. And the fact that that happened is a miracle in and of itself, because that just doesn't happen statistically. For all the rapes that happen, for it to even go to trial is a miracle, let alone to be found guilty. And this person said, of this person who was found guilty of rape, he was talking about what a great band member he was and how well he fit in with the dynamic. And then he said, well, but then all that happened, and I guess he's a rapist now. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that he was, but they said he was, so I guess he is. And the men around me who I love and respect and who I have always thought would protect me sat there and listened to this man say that and said nothing. Daniel Sloss had a special on, I think it came out on Amazon Prime. It wasn't one of his Netflix specials. His comedy special was called X. And he got into some pretty deep and dark subjects in this special for a comedy. And one of the subjects that he talked about was rape. And specifically, men's complicity in rape. And he talked about, because he had a friend, a female friend, who was raped by one of his male friends, and it happened after a night out that they were all out together. And he said that it caused him to question himself of how complicit he had been, that he didn't pay attention to the signs, and that he did not check this man in his misogynistic comments, in his sleazy behavior, because he was a friend. And no one ever wants to think badly of their friends. And his takeaway from that entire special was, boys, we need to check our boys. But nobody wants to do that. And it's really funny to me that in our society, I can say to my family that my father raped me when I was 7, and they will take me by the hand, and they will tell me they believe me, and they will hug me, and they will tell me they're there for me, and they will still invite him to every single fucking family gathering. In our society, you can have overwhelming evidence that someone is a rapist and a pedophile, and they'll still get elected president. They'll still be CEO of many multi-billion-dollar corporations. But let a single pedophile go to prison, and unless you put them under lock and key with guards around them 24/7, they will not make it out alive. And that should tell you everything that you need to know about the morality of our society. That those who we deem as degenerates and worthless are the ones who deem the lives of children worth more than some fucking scuzzbucket of a man. I remember being 14 years old and trying to help my dad build his office. He was building a little outbuilding for his office. He worked from home in IT. And I thought that would be the way that I would gain his favor and his respect, and that he would like me. And that was very silly, because my dad is a very patriarchal man, and he does not see women as holding worth. Doesn't really see anyone as holding worth, if we're being honest. And he lost his patience and threw things at me. And I started crying, as 14-year-old girls do when you do something like that to them. And he looked at me confused as to why I was having any kind of an emotional reaction. And then he said words that have been seared into my brain for eternity. Oh, I forgot. You're a girl. Like the fault was with me because of my gender. And the thing that I think about that, as I remember it now, in relation to everything else, especially in relation to the unholy matrimony of patriarchy and capitalism, the fact that no one is worth anything, that only profit is worth something. The revolution is self-worth. Show it in everything. When it's time for you to get up in the morning, remember your self-worth. I am a human, and I am worth something. So what do I deserve this morning? Do I deserve an extra 10 minutes in bed because I need it and it'll set me up right for the day? Do I need to get up now, take a shower? Because that is what my body needs, and it'll set my spirit right for the day. When I go and I realize it's lunchtime, do I ignore that it's lunchtime? No. What does my body need to keep it going for the day? What kind of fuel would most sustain me and make me feel good? Maybe give me a little joy in the process. When I need new shoes, or I want new shoes, which ones are going to feel the best on my feet? Which ones are going to make me happy when I look at them? Which ones are going to contribute to the things that I want to see in the world and not contribute to the things that I don't want to see in the world? In everything that you do, remember that you are worthy. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of life. You are worthy of every good thing that you desire. because you are human. And based solely on that, you are worthy in a structure, hierarchical system that is determined to make you worthless. Scream it as loud as you can from every cell in your body. I am worthy, because that is the revolution. Because it all boils down to that. I love you all so much, and I appreciate every single one of you who listen to this podcast more than I could ever put into words. I appreciate you all for tuning in, for following me. If you're not following me, you should. Wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, or you can check me out, linktree.com/mosaicinprogress. You can find all of my links there. You can find my Patreon. You can subscribe for free, or you can subscribe in a way that supports this continued effort. You can find my social media links there, or any links if you feel the pull to financially support me. And please, this week, I hope every day, but at least once this week, do something for yourself that reminds you that you are worthy. And that is a revolution in and of itself. And please join me next week as we both continue to work on our mosaic in progress.